Happy Wednesday, everyone. But is it happy? Because today's story is Moggy is Angry. Oh. Bye, Moggy, shouted David as his dad took him off to school. See you later. Moggy went to the window and watched David. Since Moggy had jumped down into David's garden from outer space, they had been best friends, and Moggy didn't like being left behind. He felt fed up. He made a paper boat and tried floating it on David's leftover cornflakes, but it just went soggy. Why don't you do something useful? Asked Mrs. Jones. Because useful things are boring, answered Moggy. He turned on the television and slumped into the armchair. 2 hours later, he was still there. Mary Poppins is finished, Moggy, said Mrs. Jones. Turn it off now, you've watched it quite enough. No, I haven't, Moggy answered grumpily. I want to see the PGA Championship from Wentworth. Don't be silly, Moggy. You didn't even know what that is. Now go outside into the garden and get some fresh air. I hate fresh air, grumbled Moggy. Out, shouted Mrs. Jones. Moggy stomped out into the garden, muttering all the way, and climbed onto an upside-down bucket. He put on his most ferocious face and looked through the kitchen window to see if Mrs. Jones was scared. She wasn't even looking. This made Moggy feel even more angry. He thought, I'll show her. He jumped off the bucket and ran to the apple tree and gave it a good hard kick. All the blossom fell off on his head and he felt very, very silly. How dare they treat me like this, he thought. Don't they understand how special I am? He got hotter and hotter and crosser, and bit by bit he began to change colour. Moggy was turning red from the top of his head to the tips of his toes until he was a bright red, ferocious creature. Still, nobody was taking any notice of him. He tried to think of the rudest word he knew, and he took a deep breath, and he shouted at the top of his voice. Bottom! For a moment there was silence. Then, suddenly, a face appeared over the garden wall. Who was that shouting? Said the man, sounding annoyed. Moggy threw himself to the ground and lay very still. The man spotted him. Ugh! What a nasty old red rug, he said. I'd better get rid of that immediately. Before Moggy knew what was happening, the man had jumped over the wall and scooped him into the black rubbish bag. Moggy felt the bag being lifted up and carried along until it was thrown in the air and landed with a bump. Moggy could hear a strange noise. What on earth is going on, he thought, and where am I? He pushed open the top of the rubbish bag and peeped out. Oh no, he thought. I'm in the back of a dust cart. This really is too much. Extraordinary green creatures from outer space should be treated properly, not chucked in with old baked bean tins and crumpled newspapers. Just then the dustman walked up with a bin full of rubbish and emptied it all over Moggy. It was very smelly and he felt crosser than ever. The man got into the front of the dust cart and started the engine. Through a little space in the rubbish, Moggy could see a huge shape coming towards him. Oh no, he gasped. They've turned on the crushing machine. I shall be squashed to bits in a minute if I don't get out of here. He pushed and he struggled, but the weight of all the rubbish on top of him made it impossible to move. He started to shout as loudly as he could. Help! David was just walking back from school with Mrs. Jones. Mummy, I can hear Moggy shouting, he said, and began to run towards the dust cart. He's somewhere in the back. He'll be crushed with all that rubbish in a minute. The driver turned off the engine. David ran to the back and called out, "Is that you, Moppy?" "It certainly is," answered a muffled voice. "Kindly get me out of here immediately." The kind dustman searched through the rubbish and at last pulled out a struggling, complaining black bag. "Are you all right, Moppy?" asked David. "You've changed colour." "Of course I'm all right," said Moppy, trying to fluff up his crushed fur. "You know, I sometimes change colour when I feel things. I got a bit angry, that's all." "Was it scary in the dust cart?" asked David. "Not for a brave creature like me," answered Moppy. "You're not that brave, Mop," said David. "I heard you screaming for help." Moppy turned round and walked backwards towards the house. "I hope lunch is ready," he called over his shoulder. "Will you come and sit next to me?" The end.